everything about it is ridiculous, and including, it seems to me, this recent claim that the officer was injured internally. And it almost feels like getting us to debate these particulars is the point. The fact that the ICE officer's video was released when it was not exculpatory, to the contrary, you see, as you described, how obvious it was that she was turning her wheel, etc., but also that after he killed her, he called her a fucking bitch, which is not the statement of someone remorseful or someone who's scared, and he certainly wasn't administering health aid as he was standing there cursing her out and she bled to death on her airbag. So I do wonder what you think of the choice to release that officer's video, Officer Ross's video, and how you see this sort of playing out, both among liberals who seem to be, polls suggest, extremely open to the idea of defunding ICE at this juncture. The same group that has been very hostile to defund the police. And many of the same people who were, for example, much less critical in the Daniel Penny, Jordan Neely situation. There are people who saw that killing as completely justified use of force, but who are able to see and perceive the value in the life of Renee Good, and to see that it was completely unnecessary to have ended her life in that situation. I mean, what are you making of the sort of zeitgeist response to this particular issue?
A lot of it is just partisan politics, right? Like, people are going to defend their party's choices. So people who support Trump are more likely to say the ICE agent was in the right. Although there were some conservatives who said, oh, okay, no, that was murder. I was surprised to see that. And then, of course, like, those who are Democrat are probably more likely to say that the officer was 100%, in the wrong, right? So that's part of the problem, is that it's gotten to the point now where people can't just look at a situation or an issue for what it is, because they're playing too partisan politics. And I think that's a big part of it. Donald Trump and JD Vance, they were able to get the narrative out very quickly, and that does matter. There is this tendency to kind of be on offense instead of defense, right? So if you were there that day when Renee Good was killed, you are now on the defense because Donald Trump and JD Vance got their narrative out first. And that usually appears to be more effective from what history has taught us. But the reality is, what's kind of sad to me is that the same people, or some of the same people that were making the case for Ashley Babbitt and saying that Ashley Babbitt should not have been shot by police officers during January 6th are saying that Renee Good should have been killed by those police officers. So which is it? And that's where I think a lot of the partisan divide comes in.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there were people in the left, myself included, who, frankly, even though Babbitt was forcefully, violently, in violation of the law, trying to break into a government building, did not need to be shot and should not have been shot. Even though she was part of a mob that kind of magnified the strength of her coming through and all that, she didn't need to be shot. And so the idea that it's tit for tat is really undermined by some pretty consistent voices on the left. I think Blake Greenwald has done others. There are lots of people who have a consistent view of police use of force, who think the police shouldn't shoot people we're ideologically unaligned with as well. But I do think you're right that, generally speaking, I saw a comment just now before we started recording, actually, where someone said, in response to some skepticism about whether or not the ICE agent is actually internally wounded, they said, well, if a police officer died on January 6th, that means we can say that the officer was injured on January 7th. Meaning, if a police officer died from a cardiac arrest in a way that was sort of incidental to what the protesters were actually doing on January 6th, we can claim some injury, which may or may not have been the consequence of his interaction with Renee Good, is attributable to Renee Good, and we're going to count that in the toll the same way that liberals count the police officer's death as part of the toll. And I do think that that's part of the calculus. In addition, the choice to release the officer's video seemed to be more about an effort to stigmatize Renee Good for being lesbian, her wife for being sort of more butch presenting and not someone that the right wingers could get hot for, and therefore justified in being killed. And that, like, not delusion, I mean, they're not wrong about it, but the sort of state of politics in our relationship to valuing human life being so distorted that they were confident that they would get more juice out of vilifying a woman for being snarky and gay than they would get backlash for the killer calling the murder victim a dumb bitch moments after her murder. It's dark. It's a depressing reality.
Yeah. And I figured they would do that. It's really sad. And if she wasn't LGBTQ, they would have tried to find another reason, right? Yeah. So one of the things I noticed from that video, the moment that Renee's wife started calling the officer names, he took his cell phone and he switched hands. So he moved it from one hand to the other hand so that he could free his other hand for his gun, for his weapon. What I believe is that at that moment, when she was calling him names, he had already decided right then and there that he was ready to use his weapon. whether or not she would have, backed up that car or not, he had already made a decision, and that was before he was in front of the car. The other thing people need to call out is the other officers. If you notice, the other officers did not respond the way that he did. And even when the car, like after he shot the first time, of course, like I said, her foot then hit the gas pedal. So that's why the car accelerated. At that point, people were like, look, she sped up to hit him. That was after she got the first shot. If you notice in the video, once the car was going towards the right, he was still shooting. He shot 3 times. And at that point, I really don't understand how he could have argued that his life was in danger. So I have come to a point where I'm not surprised anymore by people trying to justify an officer killing someone who is unarmed. It doesn't even surprise me anymore. I think that some liberals are surprised. I saw some of the reactions of people saying, I can't believe they killed an unarmed woman. And I said, where have you been for the past, all the years of my life? They've been killing unarmed people. They've been killing unarmed Black people for years. So this isn't new. And I've told people, time and time again, that it's only a matter of time before they come for you. What you see them do to us as Black people, they will eventually do to you. And so that's why you see this happening now with Renee Good. The sad thing about it is I don't think anything's going to be reformed or done about ICE activity. I mean, when you have people from the Trump administration saying that they have immunity, I mean, that basically gives them a free pass.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because, of course, polls are showing that more Americans are in support of abolishing ICE than ever before. More people support ICE abolishment than oppose ICE abolishment. Frequent guest on the show, Ross Barkan, who writes for New York Magazine and who has worked with Zohran Mamdani. I think Zohran Mamdani worked on his campaign 4 years ago or so in New York Assembly, and who's been doing a lot of coverage of what the New York City politics of Zohran's campaign, in particular for New York Magazine, wrote up a piece in New York Mag talking about how there's a possibility for the Abolish ICE movement to have so much more traction than the defund movement for myriad reasons, but largely hanging on the polling and inferring from the polling that there's something sort of substantively different. And my take is different. I look at the spike in popularity of Abolish ICE and I say, oh, this is trending in the same way that the spike in popularity around the defund and abolish movements were in the wake of George Floyd's murder. The burning down of the Minneapolis police precinct had majority approval in the United States of America, burning down a police precinct in the wake of that murder because people were radicalized by what they had seen on camera and live streamed public execution. And the same thing is happening now. And the question is, to me, is it sustainable, or are leftists and liberals going to be willing to abandon the cause because we are told that it's necessary in order to stop Trump and elect whatever milquetoast liberal comes down the pike next? And it does seem to me that some of the celebrating around the popularity of Abolish ICE is a little premature. Let's see what happens as midterms approach and you get a bunch of centrist politicians saying, I'm not sure that Abolish ICE is a good idea, actually. It's going to hurt my electoral chances. And let's see if the Democratic Party ends up talking the public out of actually supporting this particular policy agenda, as opposed to riding the coattails of this policy agenda that's obviously popular and increasingly popular to electoral victory. I mean,